So for the next 10 minutes or so, my job is to convince you that you can be a tireless champion for social change. So I'm guessing that if you're here this evening, you've noticed that some things aren't quite right with the status quo, and you want to do something about them. So why don't we start by giving the person next to you just a fist bump, right? Just for being here, because that's the first step. Deciding that you want to be part of social change instead of upholding the status quo. I'm also going to guess that many of you have been involved in projects or initiatives or organizations working together toward equality or social change of some kind. Perhaps you've made some protest signs, you've joined rallies, you've ranted and raved on social media, and you've had really heated conversations with friends and family members you probably want to forget. You've also probably hit some painful obstacles along the way and wondered whether your voice or your actions are really making any difference at all. Perhaps you're frustrated that despite all your passion and effort, you're still seeing headlines about sexual assault and harassment, domestic violence, and the gender pay gap on a daily basis. You'll get tired, defeated, sometimes even overwhelmed. Believe me, I get it. After working for decades, I won't say how many, but decades, towards social change, I know there are many reasons why the status quo is so hard to change. Allow me to share a few of them. Powerful institutions and powerful players in them benefit from it staying as it is. It was set up that way for a distinct reason. No wonder some people, in fact, some people and some communities seem to be negatively targeted or even left out entirely. The status quo easily seems right, or at least unchangeable, because we are trained to accept it as normal. As it's normalized, it's very hard to envision where it can actually be changed. Powerful systems themselves are designed to keep doing what they do. They handle small tweaks, but they aren't set up for big shifts or overhauls. In other words, the status quo is resilient. And practically speaking, organizations and groups are at a huge disadvantage to transform their frustration into true status quo change. So it is hard, but it's not impossible, especially when you find ways to tap into the energy that's within you and around you. So I'll tell you a bit about my own personal journey, why I've dedicated my entire life to challenging the status quo. At age 11, I immigrated from my grandmother's house, Grandma Gertrude, home in Jamaica, from Jamaica to join my family here in Canada. I struggled with culture shock for several years and a school system that didn't see me as bright and capable. One of my teachers decided I didn't belong in my grade level, and so she streamed me into the most basic of levels. When a different teacher later recognized I didn't belong there, she made the decision to put me into the regular stream. Coming back from that impact, however, on my self-esteem has been a lifelong journey. I deal with it by remembering who I am, capable and committed to justice and equality. That experience ignited my passion and interest in fairness, in activism, and removing, if not crumbling, barriers. In my early 20s, I became a young divorced mother, raising a child on my own. I worked hard in tough jobs, and I also decided to go to university at the same time. I landed community development jobs at great organizations. I took the opportunity to get a wealth of experience across program areas so I could actually learn all the elements of what it takes to change people's lives. I moved into management roles, eventually achieving my first executive director role at Yellow Brick House in Ontario, which serves survivors of abuse and gender-based violence. From there, I was recruited to YWCA Canada as a CEO, and now I am truly proud to be the President and CEO of the Canadian Women's Foundation. So, this is where my personal connection to community and change-based work stems from. It's a combination of social, family, school, and work experiences that have made me who I am today. I hope this gives you a sense of why it is that I can't be the kind of person to uphold the status quo. But that doesn't mean there weren't many points along the way when I got tired and doubted myself and felt defeated. So what does it take to really persevere and keep going? I'll share 3 lessons I've learned. Along my journey, I've had to continue asking myself and those around me, what if? What if we could get rid of the gender pay gap? What if there was no more sexual harassment, assault, or trafficking? What if women politicians weren't targets of online hate? Perhaps this sounds preposterous or far-fetched or completely unrealistic. To illustrate this kind of future is entirely possible, I'm going to ask you to join me, in fact, in a time machine. So let's take it. Let's go back about 100 years to 1919 and think about where you would be if you were a woman at that time in our country. If you were a white woman, there was some good news. You had won the right to vote in federal elections the previous year. But there were still provinces in our country where you couldn't vote in those provincial elections. And if you were a woman from indigenous or minority community, woman of color, people of color, you couldn't vote at all for several more decades. While women's political participation and representation slowly began to grow, women still couldn't be appointed to the Senate because as a woman, you weren't considered a person until 1929. Many other major advances that we take for granted today happened over the last 100 years or so. The right to take maternity leave, the institution of equal pay legislation, a system where women can file complaints or seek justice in cases of workplace discrimination. Those are just a few. What I'm getting at is that for the last 10 decades, we've made a lot of progress, and we owe it to the women activists and allies who came before us. So while our reality today is far from perfect, it is a reality that they could only dream of back then, a reality that many women would have called preposterous, far-fetched, and unrealistic. We wouldn't be where we are if some of them hadn't been tireless and kept asking themselves, what if? What if we could vote? What if women could become politicians and represent our interests? What if women could take on an equal place in the workforce and become financially independent? Over generations, women have made great strides forward, and keep in mind that they did it without the internet, without smartphones, without Facebook groups, or Twitter hashtags. Where would we be today without all of that? So that's the first step, I think, to staying tireless. You have to keep asking yourself, what if? And knowing that change is possible because we have the track record to prove it. Speaking of the track, that brings me to my second learning, which is that when it comes to progress on gender equality, we should think of it as a relay rather than an individual event. The activists and advocates who went before us handed us the baton, and we have the potential to keep it moving. But we can only do that if we keep in mind that for a relay team to actually succeed, we've got to work together, and the baton doesn't belong to any one of us. It's up to all of us to get it across the finish line. And that's really, really good news. It means that individually it's okay that we can take it only so far, When we're running out of breath, we can trust each other, trust in our teammates, and let them take it further. This is one of the most important lessons I've learned through my years of working in the women's sector. We are not alone, and we'll never get there alone. When we're getting tired and stuck individually, we know it's time to stop, turn to our allies and ask for support, create partnerships, networks, and platforms to keep the momentum going. So that's a second way that you can stay tireless. Tap into the energy around you. So allow me to take the sports analogy one step further from my last point, which is that for this movement to stay tireless, we need advocates of all talents, all strengths, all abilities. Health professionals are always telling us to stay active, and as you get older, you realize that it doesn't really matter, what you do, as long as you don't have to do a run every day, you don't have to get ripped at the gym, or be an ultimate Frisbee team player, as my mic falls off. As long as you can still hear me. There is a form of sport or physical activity that allows all of us to stay active at our own pace. So I think it's the same with activism and advocacy. People don't see themselves getting involved because they think it's all about a march or canvassing or door-to-door or asking for money or sitting in front of Parliament Hill with a sign. And I've done most of those. And it's all great, but there are so many ways to get involved, and the more ideas, voices, tools, skills, abilities, and intersectionalities that we have and bring, the better we'll be equipped to achieve equality for all women and girls and gender non-binary people. And the better we'll be equipped to challenge the status quo. So that's the third way to stay tireless. Remember that you can break down barriers in many ways. It doesn't mean changing your identity or pretending to be someone that you're not. It means using your voices and strengths the best way you can. So to recap, how to be a tireless advocate for social change? 1, keep asking what if. Remember, it's a relay, not an individual race. You're not Bolt. And there are many ways to get exercise and to exercise your activism, and we need all of them. Now I'd like to leave you with a very short video that the Kenyan Women's Foundation just released, created to capture the spirit of what I'm talking about when I say tireless. Thank you.
We've worked hard, banded together, fought for something, and made history many times. We've gotten this far because together we are tireless. Tireless doesn't mean we don't get tired. It means we help each other continue on. And knowing one voice is strong, but the power of thousands or millions is stronger. Tireless takes a stand together, and we won't rest until all of Canada is with us. We are the tireless, and together, we will achieve gender equality.